Meline was a girl who carried a world of colors and imagination inside her. From the moment her mother gave her a set of colored pencils at the age of 5, something awakened in her. She would spend hours lost in her drawings, transforming every piece of paper into landscapes of wonder, fantastical places, faces she saw at bus stops, animals she had only read about. Her small wooden bedroom slowly became a gallery of dreams, its walls covered in sketches and bursts of color. Art, to Meline, wasn't just a hobby, it was how she breathed, how she understood the world. But reality didn't share her wonder. Born to a mother who cleaned offices and a father who worked shifts at a factory, Meline quickly learned that dreams had a price her family couldn't afford. She watched her parents return home each day, shoulders heavy, eyes tired, conversations filled with worry about bills and groceries. There were nights when the fridge was almost empty, and art, beautiful as it was, didn't fill stomachs. Her father, in a voice worn by years of hard labor, would often say, "Art won't put food on the table, Maddie. You need something secure." Even when a high school teacher praised her work and spoke of scholarships to art school, her parents shook their heads. "We can't take risks," they said. "She needs a future she can rely on." So Meline folded up her dreams and put them away. She enrolled in a business administration program, safe, practical, reliable. She took a job at a local diner to pay her tuition, spending her nights cleaning tables instead of sketching. Her notebooks during lectures were still filled with doodles in the margins, and her heart still fluttered when she walked past art galleries. But she kept walking. Every choice she made was shadowed by duty, not passion. And though she smiled and pushed forward, a quiet ache lingered inside her, the ache of a soul born to create, forced to conform. After graduating from university, Meline secured a job at a rising tech company called Tech Future. On paper, it was everything her parents had ever wanted for her: a stable income, a modern office in a gleaming skyscraper, and a future that appeared secure. The building itself was pristine: glass walls, automated doors, polished floors, and the constant low hum of productivity. From her desk on the 12th floor, she could see the river winding through the city, but even that view felt distant, like a painting hung too high to truly appreciate. The workplace was efficient, but sterile. Everything from the lighting to the coffee machines seemed designed to strip away individuality and replace it with uniformity. Meline worked in the finance department, and her days quickly became a repetitive cycle of checking reports, feeding numbers into spreadsheets, and sitting through meetings that blurred together in their monotony. There was no space for creativity, no room for mistakes, and certainly no encouragement for dreams. She tried to convince herself that this was what success looked like, what adulthood demanded. But with every passing week, something inside her grew quieter, dimmer. The vibrant colors that had once filled her world seemed to drain away, replaced by the pale blue glow of a computer screen. Still, she resisted the pull of total conformity. In the early months, she clung to her old sketchpad, slipping it into her bag each morning like a secret weapon. During lunch breaks, she would escape to the small garden outside the building, sit on a bench beneath the trees, and draw. Birds in flight, the way shadows shifted with the wind, the expressions of strangers lost in their own thoughts, these small moments gave her breath. Drawing, even in silence, was her rebellion, her reminder that the artist in her still lived. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that she met Harold. He approached softly, pushing his cleaning cart across the gravel path. A man in his early 60s, Harold had a face lined with time and labor, and hands that bore the calluses of a life spent working hard. Yet his gray uniform was always neatly pressed, and his eyes, though framed by deep wrinkles, carried a lightness that surprised her. He paused beside her, glanced at her sketchpad, and said, "You have the gift." His voice was rough, like gravel washed smooth by water, but kind. Startled at first, Meline smiled, unsure of what to say. But Harold didn't expect anything in return. He simply nodded and walked on. That small interaction grew into a quiet bond. Over the following weeks, they began to speak more. Lunchtimes became a shared ritual, stories swapped between the young administrator and the aging janitor. Harold told her about his late wife, Eleanor, an artist who had painted on weekends and poured her soul into every canvas. He described the studio she'd built in their basement, the way she used to hum while mixing colors, the smell of turpentine and wildflowers that always clung to her clothes. She always said painting was like breathing, he told Melanie one day, his eyes distant. Not something you choose. Just something you can't live without. Melanie listened, moved by the tenderness in his voice, and slowly began to open up in return. She confessed that she, too, once lived for art. That her sketchbooks were filled with places she'd never seen but always dreamed of. That she had buried her passion beneath numbers and logic because life had demanded it. Sometimes, she whispered, I wonder who I would have been if I had chosen differently. Harold never interrupted, never offered false comfort. He listened in a way that made her feel heard, genuinely heard, for the first time in years. And in those quiet conversations, Melanie felt something stir within her. Not enough to break free just yet, but enough to remind her that she was more than her job title. But as time passed, Tech Future continued to grow. Restructuring after restructuring followed, and the office grew colder, more impersonal. Her workload doubled. The sketchpad found its way to the bottom of her desk drawer. Deadlines took precedence. Lunch breaks vanished. Even the garden felt farther away. Harold noticed. In the few moments they still managed to speak, he would look at her with gentle concern. Life is too short for regrets, Maddie, he would say, his voice full of quiet warning. Eleanor discovered that too late. Melanie would only smile, tired and sad. Some of us don't have the luxury of dreams, Harold. Some of us just have bills. And so, the artist within her waited, silent, buried, while the world continued on. That night, after hours of silent crying in the dim light of her apartment, Melanie sat alone on her couch, still holding the golden key in her hand. It felt heavy, not just in weight, but with meaning. The rain tapped gently on the window pane, like a quiet encouragement urging her to move. She stared at the address Harold had written, Magnolia Street, number 37. The words were simple, but they stirred something deep within her. Her heart was aching, her confidence shattered, but beneath all that, there was a flicker, a tiny spark she hadn't felt in years. Without fully understanding why, she got up, grabbed her coat, and drove. The streets were slick and quiet, glistening under the streetlights. The city, which usually felt cold and mechanical, seemed softer in the rain. As she drove through the suburbs, her mind raced with doubts. What am I doing? Why am I going there? What if it's nothing? What if I don't belong? But the key in her pocket offered a strange kind of comfort, as if Harold's quiet faith was holding her together when she couldn't do it herself. When she arrived at Magnolia Street, the headlights illuminated a small, well-kept house with a garden that looked lovingly cared for. The wooden plaque by the door read 37, just as Harold had written. Her hands trembled slightly as she got out of the car, the rain now just a mist, clinging to her skin. She found the door to the side of the house, where a small sign above it read Studio. The key slid into the lock effortlessly, like it had always been meant to be there. When she pushed open the door, a wave of stillness greeted her. Dust danced in the soft light that filtered through tall windows. The room was quiet, untouched, yet somehow alive. It didn't feel abandoned, it felt waiting. The space was filled with relics of a once passionate life, easels draped with old sheets, shelves lined with dried paint jars, brushes resting in cloudy glass cups, and blank canvases leaning patiently against the walls. There was a sewing machine in one corner, bolts of fabric folded neatly on a shelf. The scent of aged paper, oil paint, and time filled the air. It was like stepping into someone's memories, and yet, it didn't feel foreign. It felt oddly familiar. Safe. In the center of the room sat a wooden table, and on it, a single envelope with her name written in graceful cursive, "Dear Meline." Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter from Harold. In it, he explained that this was Eleanor's studio, his late wife's sanctuary, where she had poured her soul into painting and creating. He had left it untouched since her passing, unable to let go, unsure of what to do with it. But the day he saw Meline sketching in the garden, something changed. He saw in her the same spark he had once seen in Eleanor, the same quiet fire, the same hunger to create. The letter ended with a simple line: "This space is now yours, not out of charity, but because the world needs your art. Life is too short to live someone else's dream." Meline read the letter 3 times, tears falling freely now, not from pain, but from a sense of overwhelming recognition. She wasn't just reading Harold's words, she was reading a reflection of herself, seen and understood in a way she had never expected. This space was not a gift. It was an invitation. A second chance. With trembling hands, she walked to one of the easels and pulled back the cloth. Beneath it was a well-worn, sturdy wooden frame. She found a pad of sketch paper in a drawer, and a case of charcoal sticks, dry, but still usable. She sat down slowly, her fingers brushing over the tools like she was meeting old friends. And then, without overthinking, she began to draw. It was clumsy at first, shaky. But with each stroke, something inside her stirred. As the lines formed on the page, a wave of emotion surged through her: grief, hope, relief. She wasn't just drawing. She was breathing for the first time in years. In that quiet, dusty studio, surrounded by forgotten dreams and the remnants of another artist's life, Meline felt something awaken inside her. Something bold. Something real. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself again. In the months that followed, the once forgotten studio began to transform, just as Meline was transforming within. What had initially felt like a quiet refuge gradually became the heartbeat of her new life. Every morning, she unlocked the door with the same old key Harold had given her, and each time, she paused for a moment, taking in the scent of paint and wood and the soft golden light pouring through the windows. It grounded her, reminded her that she had been given not just a space, but a second chance. At first, she painted timidly, unsure of herself. Her hands trembled as she gripped the brushes, and doubt lingered in her chest like a shadow. She had no roadmap, no clients, no guarantees, only the memory of a lifelong dream and a heart that ached to create. Her first canvases were small, quiet pieces, gentle landscapes, soft pencil sketches of passing thoughts. Each stroke felt like peeling away a layer of fear. It was therapy, a conversation between her soul and the silence that had blanketed her creativity for years. The fear never fully disappeared. It clung to her in quiet moments, whispering reminders of her financial vulnerability. Even with the severance from Tech Future and the savings she had carefully hoarded during her years in the corporate world, every purchase, a canvas, a set of brushes, a pot of paint, felt like a risk. She meticulously tracked every expense, often sacrificing personal comforts to make room for her art. But she didn't resent it. For the first time, her sacrifices weren't for someone else's dream, they were for her own. Through it all, Harold remained by her side, not as a janitor, but as a mentor, a friend, almost a father figure. He visited often, sometimes silently bringing fresh tea or sitting with her while she painted. He never offered empty compliments. Instead, he offered something far more valuable: presence, belief, quiet encouragement. "You're waking the walls up again," he'd say with a proud smile, running his fingers along the dusty shelves Eleanor once touched. Then came the day that changed everything. Harold brought his niece to the studio, a gentle woman with tired eyes and a newborn cradled in her arms. She wanted a portrait of her son, something personal to mark this new chapter in her life. Meline hesitated. She had never sold a piece of her art before, never imagined placing a price tag on something so personal. But Harold nodded with quiet assurance, and Meline accepted the commission. She poured her heart into that piece, every shadow, every detail of the baby's tiny features, every brushstroke shaped by love and longing. When it was done, and she handed the portrait over, the woman's eyes filled with tears. She paid modestly, but with deep gratitude. And in that moment, something shifted in Meline. Someone had valued her art. Someone had been moved by it. That one sale wasn't just a transaction, it was validation. Proof that her gift had a place in the world. From that point on, her work slowly began to attract attention. Friends of Harold, parents in the neighborhood, even small businesses began to reach out. She designed illustrations for local children's books, painted colorful murals in coffee shops, and built a humble but growing online portfolio. Each new piece brought with it a little more confidence, a little less fear. She began to invest in the studio, not just to improve it, but to honor it. She painted the walls a soft white, installed better lighting, and replaced the dried paint pots with vibrant new ones. But she never erased the soul of the place. On a special shelf, she placed a photograph of Eleanor, the woman who had once breathed life into this space. In the photo, Eleanor stood smiling in front of a large canvas, paint-stained hands and a brush tucked behind her ear. Meline looked at that photo often, imagining her presence still lingering in the room, guiding her. 6 months after her dismissal from Tech Future, Meline wasn't just recovering, she was reborn. Her art, once hidden in the margins of notebooks, now stood proudly on walls and pages. The studio, once abandoned, now pulsed with light, color, and possibility. And within its walls, Meline no longer questioned whether she belonged, she simply did. As the months stretched on, Meline's transformation became even more profound. The steady rhythm of painting, of filling the once barren studio with vibrant colors and life, began to anchor her in ways she hadn't anticipated. With every brushstroke, she chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart, the walls that had once protected her from vulnerability. Slowly, she embraced the uncertainty of her new life, learning to dance with it rather than hide from it. The fear that had haunted her during her corporate years, the fear of failure, of financial instability, of not being enough, was still there, lurking in the background, but she no longer allowed it to paralyze her. Instead, she used it to fuel her creativity, to prove to herself that she could create something beautiful, even in the face of doubt. Each day in the studio felt like a small victory. At first, Meline had hesitated to call herself an artist. She had spent so many years hiding her talent, convincing herself that art was just a hobby, something that could never be her real job, never be her real life. But now, with each painting that left the studio, with each client who asked for a commission, she found herself stepping more and more into that identity. The walls of her studio became more than just a physical space, they became the walls of her new life, one built not on the shaky foundation of corporate meetings and spreadsheets, but on the firm ground of her own dreams and passions. Even as she grew more confident, there were days when the old fears crept back in. The uncertainty of whether her next piece would sell, whether she could continue to support herself with her art, would occasionally make her stomach churn. She worried about falling behind, about the potential failure that still hung over her like a dark cloud. There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning whether she was making the right choices. Was it worth it to take this risk, to pour everything into her passion when she had nothing but a handful of savings and a dream? But in those moments of doubt, she reminded herself of why she had made this choice in the first place, the feeling of the brush in her hand, the joy of creating something from nothing, the overwhelming sense of freedom when she painted. Her connection to the studio, to her art, grew deeper with every passing day. It wasn't just about the act of painting anymore, it was about reclaiming a part of herself that she had buried for so long. In the beginning, she had been afraid to express herself fully, afraid that her art wouldn't be good enough, that it would never meet the expectations she had placed on herself. But now, she painted for herself. The anxiety that once colored her work, the pressure to be perfect, slowly faded away. She painted what she felt, what she saw, what she believed. Every piece became a conversation between her soul and the canvas, a way to explore the hidden corners of her heart and share her innermost thoughts with the world. As her art began to gain more recognition, Meline was overwhelmed by a sense of gratitude. Her first commission had been a turning point. When Harold's niece had asked for a portrait of her newborn son, Meline had been filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. She had never sold a piece of art before, and the thought of someone paying for her work felt surreal. But when the portrait was finished, and the payment was made, Meline realized that her art had the power to touch people, to evoke emotions and create memories. The feeling of handing over that painting to Harold's niece, knowing it would hang in her home for years to come, filled her with pride and joy. It was a validation she hadn't known she needed, proof that her dreams weren't just wishful thinking but were, in fact, attainable. Over time, more commissions followed. Her reputation grew as word of mouth spread. Meline found herself painting for local businesses, designing murals that brought life to cafes, and illustrating children's books that touched the hearts of parents and kids alike. The steady stream of work reassured her, but it was the quiet moments in the studio that brought her the most peace. When she stood before a blank canvas, the world outside disappeared. It was just her and the colors, the lines, the brush strokes. That was when she felt most alive, most herself. But even as her business expanded, Meline never lost sight of the roots of her journey. She remembered the doubts that had plagued her, the fear of failure that had once kept her locked in a corporate job she hated. And in those moments of quiet reflection, she realized how far she had come. The woman who had once walked into the office of Tech Future with her head down, unsure of herself and her worth, was now standing tall, her hands stained with paint, her heart full of purpose. She had found her voice, and she was no longer afraid to use it. Harold continued to be her steady companion, offering words of wisdom, encouragement, and the kind of support that only a true friend could give. He would drop by the studio, often without warning, and just sit with her while she worked, silently reminding her that she was never alone in this journey. He believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself, and his unwavering support had been the anchor she needed. He encouraged her to keep going, to keep painting, to keep pushing through the fear and uncertainty. "You've got this, Meline," he would say, his eyes shining with pride. One day, after Meline had completed a particularly meaningful commission, a mural that captured the essence of her hometown, Harold came to visit. He stood before the painting, his hands trembling slightly, and a tear welled up in his eye. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "You've become everything you ever wanted to be." Meline smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. The fear that had once gripped her was now a distant memory. She had embraced the risk, faced the uncertainty, and found not only success, but fulfillment. Now, Meline was living a life she had once only dreamed of. The studio was thriving, her art was being recognized, and most importantly, she felt complete. No longer was she defined by the corporate world, by the security of a paycheck or the approval of others. She was defined by her passion, by the way she poured her heart into every canvas, and by the community of people who believed in her vision. She had faced her fears head-on, and now, for the first time in her life, she was truly free. The world was full of possibilities, and Meline knew that as long as she held onto her art, she could face whatever came next.